Hey guys, dates en route are all laid out, registration's open, so now we're moving on to what is to me the most important part of the ride. So for those of you who know, I came up with this ride last year to travel around Canada because I needed something upon releasing from the forces. You know, I needed a purpose. I needed to find a passion, and I think that's one of the things most of us struggle with, probably the most, more than anything, after release, whatever your reason for release is, and the inspiration behind it, in addition to just having to have a purpose and needing a bit of adventure, really came from a friend of mine named Sheldon Roberts. And Sheldon had given his story to CBC. He'd done an interview and he talked about a lot of the struggles that he had. And it had a pretty profound impact on me. The biggest thing I realized was that Sheldon had these struggles that were very similar to my own. And, you know, I didn't judge Sheldon harshly for any of those things. Not at all. Not a bit. But, you know, he spoke about some of his perceptions about the struggles he had, how it made him feel, and I could relate to all that. And what really struck me was, you know, I didn't judge Sheldon harshly for his struggles, but I judged myself harshly for those struggles and for the same ones. And it really kind of hit home that the need to share these personal stories, not because your experience may be so much different than mine, you know, not because my experience might be, you know, something so over the top that it needs to be shared, but more to the point that we as a community, as first responders, as veterans who are affected particularly by operational stress injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, sharing those stories removes the stigma, and sharing those stories will have an impact on our peers. And your story may be essentially the same as mine, but your peers aren't. And your voice is going to carry that message much more effectively than mine will. So the whole idea is to get out there, get as many people to share their stories as I can, and through their personal and peer networks, the people that they have personal influence with, really just start to break down that stigma that we can't talk about the struggles we have after service, or the things that affect us. And so that's essentially what I set out to do last year. And I had the pleasure of sharing Sheldon's story, which he had shared through CBC. And I shared my own personal story for a couple of reasons. One, because I had to. You know, that's kind of part of the whole premise. But the other thing is, if I'm going to go out and ask people to share their struggles, then I better be willing to share my own as well. And so I am. I also had the pleasure of interviewing Craig Carney and Susan Musgrave, both great people. You know, things got thrown together pretty quickly last year, so I really got to do those two interviews, and the rest of it was me sharing my story, my thoughts on transition out of the forces, and just things as they occurred to me. And you know, it definitely seemed to resonate with people. So that tells me, you know, I was on the right track. So this year's ride is definitely about that as well. So I'm going to go back to sharing some of my thoughts and observations on transition. For anybody out there, veterans, first responders, you know, we want to hear your story, and we want your peers to hear your story. So we can start to break down the stigma, and we can start having these conversations that move us towards healing. And with that in mind, as the ride progresses, as we go around the St. Lawrence Seaway, through Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, Labrador, if you're out there, a first responder or a veteran, come on out and share your story, or just come on out and connect. So that's really the biggest aim of the ride, is to get people out there and get connected and share their story. So you can get in touch through the email address. It's at the bottom of the screen. It'll be in the description as well, if you want to share your story. If you're in Southern Ontario, between now and the ride kicking off the 5th of August, I'll be looking to do some interviews with first responders and veterans here. First opportunity really is probably going to be in Owen Sound this weekend, May 18th and 19th. I will be at Bombshell Stella's grand opening. So Heather Morris, a friend of mine who owns Bombshell Stellas, has very generously offered to raise funds. And I want to take the opportunity to extend invitation to any veterans or first responders in the Owen Sound, Georgian Triangle area who want to come out, have some great food, connect, talk. If you want to share your story, I'll be there ready, if you want to give an interview. And the interview format's pretty simple. It's basically 3 parts. The first is positive reflection on service. So many of us leave sometimes under terrible circumstances, or we've got an injury and we've got struggles, and it's easy to lose sight of all the great things about why we did what we did. So the first thing, the interview process wants to encourage is just that positive reflection on your time in uniform, your time in public service, your time, as EMS, police, fire, military. So that's the first part. The second part is just being open and honest about your struggles. What is it you deal with daily, kind of those dark moments or those challenges that you face. And really it's about, again, breaking down that stigma and reaching your peer group and others and just encouraging people to talk about it, because it's the silence that kills us. And the last thing is what you're doing now, what you do to manage it, what you're doing, what purpose you found. For me, doing this, outdoor adventures is the purpose. It's the way I manage it. It's the way I deal with it. A whole lot of other things. And it doesn't have to be anything big and grand. The simple things, what you do to ground yourself, what you do when you're having a bad day, anything at all. So, it doesn't have to be this big, huge thing to have an impact. Quite the opposite. Just what you do to get through, what makes life worth living for you. And, one thing we don't talk about, and, to quote Fred Doucette, an old mentor of mine, we don't talk about the war porn. We don't talk about the mechanism of injury. And, that mechanism of injury for a lot of us is going to be very different. And quantifying, so-and-so's experience compared to mine. Oh, well, mine's nothing compared to theirs. So do I have the right to have this injury? That's another stigma, and that's another barrier to healing and to being well. So we don't talk about that mechanism of injury. That doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that, so many of us share these common struggles, maybe not the experiences, but the struggles. And that's the struggles, and what we do to manage them is really the focus of the project. That's what I want people to share. So again, Owen Sound, the address will be down in the description. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Bombshell Stella's, get some great food. Come on out and help support the ride. Come on out and say hello. And, if you're not ready to go on camera and share your story, that's cool. If you're not ready to share your story with me, that's cool. But as long as you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about those people you can connect with, that you can share it with, then my job here is done. That is what I want out of this ride. In addition to that, the shared adventure and camaraderie of bringing people from those backgrounds together, because let's face it, most of us probably set out to be a part of those cultures because we crave a bit of excitement. We crave challenge. We crave adventure. And that's another part that can be missing once you leave that culture behind. So getting out there and pushing ourselves physically, mentally, seeing new places, being out in the air for 11 days straight, all of it, to me, that's probably one of the biggest, of healing experiences, is just getting out there and getting challenged and getting connected. So that's, the other part of the ride is, let's go find that adventure. Let's go find that camaraderie and, see where we share that common ground. So Bombshell Stella's, 18th, 19th of May in Owen Sound, address below, and, just come on out. And if you're anywhere in Southern Ontario, reach out. If you're anywhere along the route, reach out, and we will figure out how to get, if you're willing to share your story on camera, we'll figure out how to make it happen, that we can get together and do that, because that really is the whole point. So I'm going to leave you guys with that, and you can guarantee you'll be hearing from me next week. Until then, I hope to see some of you in Owen Sound, and, I'll see you next week.